Hello, beautiful, and welcome to another episode of Beautiful I Am Colored. This is the place where I've shared stories from my debut book that holds the same title as this podcast. I'm honored that you have returned to hear more of my stories, and thank you to those of you who tuned in last week. I appreciate your support. For those interested, you can follow me on Instagram at Beautiful I Am Colored. You can also pick up or order a copy of my new book on my website at beautifuliamcolored.com. This week, we're going to be switching things up, and because I finished sharing all the stories from my book last week, if you recall in last week's episode, I told you that Marlon Barnes would be rejoining me for the remainder of the month of April before we kick off season 2 in the month of May. So I have him back by somewhat popular demand, which is strange to say, but I'm happy to have him here this week as my co-host, and we're going to get started here in just a minute or so. But first, as always, just would like to say thank you so much to those of you who have listened the past several weeks since almost the beginning of February, for those of you who are regular listeners. And I am going to go ahead and kick this off by just saying that if you haven't listened to the previous recordings regarding the stories that Marlon was included in, as well as our conversation previously, several episodes back, I will encourage you to go and kind of refresh or go and listen for the first time, which could provide some additional context. I invited Marlon back on the show for the rest of the month, honestly, because he's a person that I flow very good with conversationally, naturally. And so today is a very unscripted. This is a live recording. I'm not editing. Frankly, I just don't have the time to do editing work. So it's going to be what it's going to be. And so I actually like that about how we flow. Marlon Barnes, I'm privileged to have you back on the show this week. And the topic that I wanted to cover today, which I've already shared with Marlon, is evolving within your relationships. How have we evolved as a couple, individually? How has the evolutionary process impacted us, past tense, present tense, and anything else we want to contextually color our conversation with? So Marlon, welcome back to Beautiful I Am Colored. I'm happy to have you back. I wish y'all could see his face.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on your show, Evelyn. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, given the kind of, I actually haven't even decided what I'm going to title this yet. Of course, by the time you hear this, you'll know the title, but I haven't decided yet. I'll probably sit on that for a second before making it live. But I kind of wanted to talk through like the evolutionary process of change. I know that for us, we definitely have gone through in our relationship. For those of you who don't know, we've been married now a little over 26 years. We just celebrated our 26th anniversary in February, yes. So not too long ago. And there definitely have been, I would say, years that were exceptionally pivotal and critical in terms of growth for both of us in different ways. And so I don't know how long this recording is going to be, but we're going to kind of free flow and vibe off of each other, and we're going to go until the spirit lifts, for lack of a better word. But I do want to open it up by just asking you, Marlon, like, in terms of change or evolution and the growth patterns associated with being married for so long, what sticks out to you the most about like change in a relationship, in our relationship, but you could actually apply it more broadly, if you would like. And I just want to kind of give you room to be as broad or as specific as you will want when you think about the word evolution in the context of a committed relationship. What has that meant to you? What does that look like? And you can provide examples as you like.
Change in relationships as they evolve.
Well, the evolution is change, right? It's a type of change.
Yeah, that's true. So I would frame it this way: everything is subject to change, and no one stays the same. And so when I think about marriage, I think that everyone has to anticipate that the person you married back in the day, whenever you got married, will change. And it's okay. That change will take place. I think what's most important is having a commitment to change. Each individual having a commitment to change, and then communicating about, the change that's taking place. I think a lot of times you hear about couples growing apart and all these type of things, which means they changed, right? And so I think you can't pretend that change is not going to happen. I think that's the first thing. You can't pretend that it's not going to happen. It's going to happen. Like you changed, I changed. That's just part of life. Mm-hmm. And so I think not being, naive to the fact that your spouse will change, A, and then B, being willing to have conversations about that change, mm-hmm. and really participating in that conversation and mapping out, what does this change mean for us? What does it mean for you? And being proactive about it. I think if you don't do that, I think sometimes change can be very, very difficult in a marriage. And even if you do it, it's going to be challenging.
It's still difficult.
But I think it probably is more difficult if you're not talking about it. But I think having your eyes open to it is important. And I think you got to engage change, so that you can be a part of the changes. And you can help your marriage adapt by being a part of that change versus just sitting by and letting it happen and then looking up and being like, man, like, I don't know what happened. Like, we just not the same anymore. We just, it ain't there anymore, type of thing, right? So I think participating gives you a much better chance. Being actively involved in that change gives you a much better chance, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So, I mean...
let me actually ask a follow-up question. With that being said, we like a certain show on Friday nights. I'm not gonna say the name of the show because at this point, for me to mention the name of a show, you're gonna have to pay me.
Yeah, that costs.
So I'm not gonna mention the name of this dating show that we like to watch on Friday nights. That comes on a certain Black-owned network. But what do you say to people who have the assumption, and probably maybe even beyond assumption, expectation that who they married, when they married them, should remain intact? In other words, if you met me and my measurements were a 36, 26, 42, the expectation of me maintaining that 20 years later, like, that was kind of hyperbole, but you get what I'm saying. Like, the expectation of maintaining that through childbirth, through whatever, like, how realistic is that? And what do you say, or what do you think when you hear, like, well, I expect the person that I married, I expect for that person to still be?
Well,
first of all, how can you even say that 10, 20, 30 years later?
Well, you're talking about physical change right now.
Well, that was just a hypothetical. You can apply it to whatever.
Well, I think there's a difference, right? Because, maybe there's not a difference. Physical change can be tough.
We're going to go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're
going to go ahead and start like that?
Yeah. It's one thing to change as, a human, as you evolve. But there's another thing to change physically. Of course, as we get older, people physically change. Uh-huh. But I do think there's something to be said about being aware of how you're physically changing. Obviously, you married the person because you're aesthetically attracted to them.
Do you think that most people decide to be in a committed relationship because aesthetic reasons are like a high? Like, I'm
just saying that's part of it. I mean, like a part of the attraction to the person, I would imagine, includes their appearance. Not all. Mm-hmm. There has to be more to it than that, but a part of it.
Okay.
So,
that's fair.
Assuming that a part of the attraction was physical, you have to be mindful of. You got to be mindful of where you need to be mindful of what's happening to you physically.
Okay.
That would be wise. Now,
I was not expecting you to, but you pivoted because I provided some measurements and we went down a physical path. I was actually not anticipating us to go down this route, but since we are here, let's talk about it. And on my show, I like to be transparent and I like to talk about myself. So the measurements I gave out actually were not my measurements. My measurements was actually tighter than that. Boom, boom. My measurements back in the day was 36, 3, and then 42. That's high school measurements though, people. Very unrealistic. And for the women who are listening to me, to compare yourself to what your high school self was is absolutely asinine. Especially if you're in your 30s or 40s. Your body has not even fully become all of the womanliness that you are. But nonetheless, those were my stats back in the day. With that being said, after giving birth to the first one, which most of you know who listen to my podcast now know that I was a teen mom, I think I went from, if I remember correctly, and this is approximation, I went from weighing 141 to 145-ish to 170-ish, and I'm 5'4". And for me at that time, being so young, that was, the proportionality of it all was a bit overwhelming. I mean, now I look at that number and I'm like, well, things change. But with that being said, how did you feel? And be transparent. How did you feel about, even though it was associated with pregnancy, I want just your honest perspective about, like, from a physicality only standpoint, like, did the pregnancy, knowing the pregnancy part of it, help you to, like, kind of balance the weight gain out? Or, like, from an aesthetic piece, what were the implications of that particular change? Because we want to stay on topic, right? And so we're talking about evolution and change in the marriage. And for whatever reason, we cascaded into physicality. So we're going to stick with this.
Well, knowing that you was pregnant and had our beautiful daughter, I think the reasoning behind the weight, it's natural, right? So, it's hard. What, you gonna be mad? I mean, it's nothing you really can do about the fact that, you was pregnant and the changes that your body went through during the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. For me, I mean, it didn't really stop nothing. Like, I was cool. Mm-hmm. I you know what I'm saying? Of course, I noticed the difference. But I don't know, at that time, it didn't necessarily affect me per se, right? It was like, okay, you gained the weight, pregnancy over, you're working on trying to lose the weight, get pregnant again. Like,
away.
We was in that phase, mm-hmm. right? So during the time, I don't know that my mind was like, I didn't see it as a permanent thing mm-hmm. at the time.
Okay, you just said it as a permanent. Okay.
I didn't see it as it didn't seem permanent. So for me, it's kind of like, okay, whatever. You have kids, we're working through it. You asked me how I felt at the time. Yeah, no, that's how it hit me, right? That's how it hit me.
Yeah.
So that wasn't so much a problem. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that now.
Has there ever been in our relationship, and I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
But has there ever been in our relationship a time where you were like, this maybe potentially is going in the wrong, like maybe you were thinking, like, from a physicality standpoint, mm-hmm. has there ever been that time? And if not, why not?
I'm telling you, like, I know this. I can hear my brothers right now. They go say I'm copping out, and I'm not copping out. Like,
And hold that thought. Please do not lose your thought. We're gonna take a quick break, have some little remarks here for the people, and then we're gonna come right back. Okay, y'all sit tight. It's just a little 1 minute break. Okay, people trying to get paid over here. We'll be right back in about 1 minute. Thank you so much for obliging us there with a little brief intermissions, aka commercial. Okay, so did you lose your train of thought?
No, I did not. But
I love you for that. Okay,
if you want to refresh me, you can. But I didn't lose my train of thought. I was just basically saying that I know for sure my brothers would say I'm copping out. They said, "Bro, you're not telling the truth." But at the time, that's how I saw it. We were having children back to back.
Facts.
So to me, it was just like, okay.
I honestly didn't even really have enough time. Like, as soon as I would lose like 20, 30 pounds, boom, right back pregnant again.
So for me, I saw that, right? So it's kind of like, it wasn't like after the children were born that there wasn't progression made. Almost every time.
Sure.
So you always was like working on yourself, and then you was getting pregnant. So for me, it was like, and clearly, whatever weight you gained wasn't no problem because you was getting pregnant.
I can't. You stupid. I cannot.
Clearly, it was not an issue for me, and it wasn't. But you know, so for me, there wasn't like. Now, frankly, if you didn't ask me this question, but like, let's say for instance, after the kids were born, there was no effort, and you just was holding that weight, and you just kept that weight, holding that weight. Yeah.
It was the language.
Yeah. So would that be a problem? You know, I first of all, I'm gonna love you, and I committed to be in this marriage, and so I'm gonna work with it. I'm gonna work with you, but. Would that be a challenge? Would that be something we have to talk about? Absolutely. And I would say it probably would be. You know what I'm saying? Right? That's like longer term, just to say, hey, you know, like, what's going on? You know what I'm saying? Like, where you at? So, yeah, I think I think that could potentially have been a problem if, let's say, there was no effort. You just like, hey, I had these 4 children. This happened to me. I'm not working out. I'm not doing anything. And it's like, it is what it is type of thing. And I'm still eating. I'm just on that path. I mean, it will require a conversation. It would.
Okay.
And I think that, yeah, but that don't mean that it would be over and things like that. I think to your point, we age, we commit ourselves to loving each other and being together. And things change, right? One can say, well, what if you get sick and that happens? And you gain that kind of weight? What happens then? You know what I mean? So I do think it's within context. And I think every situation is different. You know what I mean? But I either way, I think any type of change requires a conversation. You know what I'm saying? Even if there was something that couldn't be done about it, hey, like checking in with each other and saying, okay, what does this mean? You know, how are you dealing with this type of thing?
I feel like you're making some good points, but I will also say that we have rarely had those type of direct confrontations. It more or less comes in, from my experience, it comes in more or less like hints. And I recall there being a conversation between you and your brothers about this very topic, physicality. And they were asking me about it, and were asking like, do you say anything to me? And I remember saying, well, no, it comes in the forms of hints. For example, if you order pizza and then I order pizza and I order wings, and the question might be something like, so you ordered the boneless wings and the non-boneless wings, and we're gonna have pizza too, right? And so the question in and of itself, just even being posed to me, is a hint that you might be stepping across the line, or you might be out of line, depending on what what I've said, my goals and objectives were from a physicality standpoint.
Sure.
With that being said, I do have to say that I feel like within the context of a relationship, not only is working out, and just so you know, because I know you're not on social media, so you don't always see the things I post on my beautiful I Am Color Instagram account, which if you don't follow me, I encourage you to do that, because I do try my best to post inspirational things every day, and motivational things every day on that. But I've been posting different things about working out, you know, because during the COVID, you know, we was throwing back the cocktails.
For sure.
Heavily and quickly and easily from the excessive sugar content, as well as the alcohol, as well as the sedentary lifestyle that was imposed upon us by extenuating circumstances. I picked up a good strong 20-25 pounds, just like that. And so I've been working consistently for a while now to get that weight off, and even go beyond that to get myself tightened up with lifting weights as well as cardio. And so I just set out to say that I really do feel like it is vitally important in the context of a relationship, whatever that is for you, like do yoga if that's what you do, to run, bike, do YouTube videos, which I do frequently, and I share, you know, I'm not gonna shout out who I watch, because again, you know, that's a different type of, right, like, so we're not gonna be doing that. But you know, the different indoor walking, you know, 3, 4, 5 mile indoor walking exercises and stuff like that. And also, not only that, I want to be appealing not only to myself, and sure, you got to be content with where you are, but I do think that there's a such thing with being too comfortable in a relationship to where you don't take care, you start to not care for a host of reasons. And what I'm saying is, usually that's an indication of what's going on with the person internally than it necessarily is with the person that you are linked up with or married to. And I just want to encourage the people who listen to this particular podcast is that I feel like your health and well-being is always, should be, first and foremost. We have a saying in our relationship, and that is, you can pay now or pay later, right? So paying now may look like there's a bit of an extra bill in terms of extra on the grocery bill in terms of choosing organic foods or whole foods, you know, and paying for that expense, versus 20 years from now when you're in your 60s and you're paying for that expense on the flip side because you didn't make the right decisions, or you didn't make the healthiest decisions, you know, when you were younger. So we have committed to erring on the side of being more cautious now, so that we don't have to pay for that, you know, as we become seniors within the next 20 years or so. With that being said, I would like to know from you, for the listening audience, of course I live with you so I know, but you are a former athlete, and I think that speaks a lot to your ability to bounce back, or snap back as the ladies say, relatively quickly. But what are some of the things that you feel like, or that you would encourage, like say somebody who is listening who hasn't been in the gym, and again this would be targeted more towards the brothers listening, but what would you say are some of the things that you would encourage another man to like do as you're in pursuit? Like, you just ordered a bike, right? So what are some of the things that you would encourage people to do, from like, you know, get moving if you haven't been, or even if you're more advanced?
No, man, I do probably take it for granted that, you know, I've worked out my entire life from us, you know, from playing sports and stuff like that. So it is, although it's getting more difficult the older I get, it still is somewhat easy to get back into it and find a rhythm. I can only imagine someone who don't have that background and they're trying to get active. So I would just say, do something. You know what I mean? Like, walking is really a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, just being active, just moving, doing something is everything. You know what I mean? Because you can always add to that. You can always improve. You just got to do something. You know what I mean? Like, you have to make your mind up that you're going to do something. And then you can add. right? So like to me, the first part is just getting over the hump of you know, not doing anything. You know what I mean? Like that's the first hump, and you can find various motivations. You know, sometimes crisis can do it. Sometimes, you know, a nudge from your spouse can do it, but it's gonna have to come from you. But once you get going, it's easy to gain momentum once you get going, but you gotta get going, you know. And so I wouldn't even recommend like a certain type of you know, exercise or activities to go along with it. I would just say do something and start it, and then get some consistency about it, and then let it go from there. You know, but I'm going to pivot the conversation a little bit, because I do think the physical part is one thing, and I know we hit on that a little bit, and I feel like the message came through pretty clear that, hey, you should be aware of that, and of course, if you know one of the spouses is having a challenge, maybe that's something you should talk about and together, and you know, and try to encourage each other to make something happen, because you are you know, maybe part of the reason you married them was the physical attraction. But I do think there's other changes in marriage I know that we've experienced that I think are also just as important, if not more important, or dynamic in regards to how it could alter a marriage. You know, early on in our marriage, you had all the children, you was at home. I was working all the time.
Big
you know,
facts.
Pursuing, you know, just trying to take care of a family.
Sure.
And
this is a major pivot.
And
actually.
then now,
Yeah.
and now our children are young adults. You know, we're some people like to joke about us being empty nesters and things like that, which, you know,
Almost.
we're not quite there yet, but
about 50%.
But we move around the way we like to move around.
Facts.
You know, talk about what that's been like for you, being a non-traditional student, raising children while I work, and then coming full circle, you know, getting degrees, doing your thing, pursuing your podcast, your book. Talk about that and how that change has been for you and us.
I appreciate you putting on your co-host hat and flipping the script and pivoting. I think that it is absolutely has been somewhat of a roller coaster. By that I mean there have been a series of ebbs and flows. I mean, and before I say what I'm going to say, let me say this to anyone who's listening to me right now, and I pray that you hear me in the right spirit. And that is, please remove any comparison of whatever you're going through and comparing it to me and Marlon. We are an anomaly, okay? You know, I realize that at this point. I have several close personal friends. We are an anomaly. So our goal and objective is just to encourage you and provide some information and insight to maybe that might be something that you want to apply, but don't fall into the trap of comparing whatever your scenario is to ours, because ours is definitely more unique than most people. With that being said, I absolutely had some challenges in terms of changing, because I mean, I met you when I was 14 years old, a child, you know, a youth. And so within that alone, there's going to be change, right? As you age and progress. When we got married, I was 18. So 4 years from the time, you know, I met you, I would say that the change was hard from the standpoint of I was trying my best to do the right thing. And I did have like my grandmothers definitely who were super influential about, you know, how to run a household, how to be a wife, how to, you know, train your kids and things like that, which was pretty much with very sternness and being very firm and consistent. But I think I kind of didn't really know who I was, like as a person early on. And if I'm really honest with you listeners, I am definitely, I feel just now stepping into who I've always meant to be, who I am, the part of me that was always there, but I didn't necessarily know how to tap into it. Whatever you want to put on it, I think I'm just at the tip surface of touching that right now, and I'm 44. And so early on, when I was definitely like in my 20s and stuff, I think I struggled a lot with, not that I ever felt that I was ugly or anything like that, but I think I did struggle with, like I said, not knowing how to be as a mom, as a wife, but then also not knowing fully who I was, like independent of you, and having to learn that under the context of being married while you were also experiencing your growth presented a lot of challenges for me. For example, we touched on physicality, like, and that's still very important to me, but I actually just do like working out, frankly. That was hard for me because there was really no one close to us at that time that was in our same scenario. There was no one who was 24 years old who had already been married 6-7 years and had 4 kids, to be frank with you. And so it made me feel very isolated from my peers, because the people I know that we grew up with, they were all in college, finished college, starting their careers or had careers. And so that I definitely experienced a period to where I felt kind of I hate to use this term, but it's applicable, black sheep-ish, if you will, like the odd man out, the odd woman out, the green person, the frumpy stay-at-home mom, because as you know, I homeschooled, too, for a season. And so all of that, although I don't regret it at all of that lended its hand to me trying to figure it out, And I will say explicitly and frankly, I still ain't figured it out. I'm still working through it, each and every day. And it's a challenge some days, but it feels like the older I get, the easier it becomes to settle on things a little bit faster than I did in the past. And so that's one piece. And I feel like my mind is going in a whole bunch of different places because there's been so much historical context, to respond to your question. But I feel like the best decision I made was making the decision to kind of put me first in the context of our marriage. And I also think that was the point at which additional change occurred, in terms of you watching me blossom, if you will, and I use that lightly, but move or evolve into the person that I'm becoming. And that even was scary. I talked a little bit about that, like, in my book, where I pondered divorce because the change was so heavy and it didn't seem like we were clicking on all cylinders. But it was because there was so much turmoil associated with the growth. And I think that, and we talk about this privately on our own all the time, and that is when change comes upon you and is growing you, which I do believe that challenges, things that you're presented with, they are here to grow you depending on how you perceive it. It almost feels like death. It almost feels like a certain type of how can I say, erosion that you can't control, and the uncertainty associated with the erosion, or the chipping away at the old for the new to become, was frankly, it was hellish. It was hellish, frankly, and it's not to minimize it. I'm laughing because I'm struggling to find the words to fit it in this context, but if I'm really honest, it was scary, it was hellish, but at the same time, I didn't want to stay I didn't want to remain the stay-at-home mom. I didn't want to remain just being known as, say, Marlon's wife or Keiko's wife or Keiko's girlfriend or whatever. There were certain things that were transpiring at the time that were pushing me almost in my back, you know what I'm saying, to move forward. And it scared me, or I think it scared me to make a decision to not move forward. So I didn't have a choice. And so hopefully that resonates with you all and you can understand what I'm saying. I know I kind of spiderwebbed a little bit around your question, Marlon, but and me just being transparent and talking to you like how we would if I wasn't recording right now, that's truly how I feel.
Well, this conversation, I could. This is part one of a much more comprehensive conversation, because there's so many layers involved in this. Because going back to what I said earlier, change is inevitable anyway. Everyone's changing, whether you know it or not. Like, there's no such thing as standing still. Like, this is a natural law. Like, everything is moving. And so I think it's important that we hit a couple of more layers on this, because in marriages, in the roles and the dynamics of marriage, there's expectations that are put on each other, and you want to, at times you find yourself wanting to keep somebody, your spouse, in that box of whatever you thought they should be, a mother or you know, a wife, in regards to just, oh, you should just be cooking, or you should be doing these things, like these traditional roles and these expectations that are placed.
I'm glad you mentioned cooking, because as you know, that's a pet peeve for me. Not that I can't cook. Let me be very clear. Not that I can't cook, because please know that I can cook. I don't like to cook. So that's definitely something we need to touch on in more detail.
As well as, no, for sure, right? And as well as, you know, the insecurities that come with watching a spouse evolve, right? Because sometimes change comes in different times, right? You know, you could be going through a major change, and your spouse might not be might not be in that season at all. And maybe you're becoming vegan, or maybe you just had this real dynamic change, a spiritual change, anything, right? And you could go from being who that person thought you were to being something completely different. And so I think it's important to talk about how to navigate that. And I don't know, I'm sure there's times when it's not even possible to navigate that.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's what people say, right? Is when people grow apart, right?
Right?
So I think there's more to this that we really, really need to dive into. I think just kind of wrapping this up a little bit from my standpoint, and then I'll kind of let you close this out, is that the first thing to keep in mind is that everybody's changing. And if in a marriage, that's no different. And being able to communicate with each other what these changes are, and being able to be transparent, knowing that these are tough conversations, can be very helpful, because you can begin to decide how you want to respond, or you can even communicate to your spouse how you would like for them to support you potentially in these changes. And some of these conversations can produce some best practices that will allow what I would call, growth together.
So then, as an example, so if I were to ask you right now, can you please download the grocery store apps on your phone, and you and you start to do the grocery stuff? I mean, like that would be an example, right? Your face is so great, because you just advised, and I just tried to apply an example, which I know is a very accurate example.
I didn't get a chance to answer.
Do you see?
I didn't answer. I didn't get a chance to answer.
Do you hear, people?
I didn't get a chance to answer.
I wish y'all could have seen this face.
I feel like you're trying to ambush me.
Ambush?
Yeah, like I didn't get a chance to answer.
Here's your chance.
Do I get some time to think through it?
Wow. Okay. We're going to stop right here, because it is a gorgeous day, albeit windy, but it is sunny out. I'm about to put on these aviators and go on my back patio. I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to this week's I'm certain, interesting episode of Beautiful I Am Colored. Marlon Barnes has been my co-host for this week. Thank you so much, love, for joining me. We will continue the conversation, and I really, truly am going to hold him to my suggestion of him doing that, because that's been one of my roles for decades now.
I got some suggestions for you, too.
You got some suggestions for me?
I do.
Wow. Do you see how he interrupted my closing? Listen. Y'all have an amazing week. Thank you so much for all of you who tuned in. If you like what you're hearing, you want to hear more of it, you can support me by following me on Instagram using the hashtag Beautiful I Am Colored, ordering my book, which is available on beautifuliamcolored.com, and sharing this message, sharing this podcast with others. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We'll be returning next week, next Sunday, for another episode of Beautiful I'm Colored, where we're going to continue the conversation about the evolution within a marriage. I might have a couple of confessions myself to piggyback off of a couple stories that I shared. But until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Again, thank you for joining us on another episode of Beautiful I'm Colored. Have a wonderful week, everyone.